I'd like to introduce the first speaker, if I may. Our first speaker today is Dr. Richard Lowes. Richard, welcome. He's a senior associate with RAP, which is the Regulatory Assistance Project. Richard is a senior energy policy professional. He heating technology and policy. He currently works at the University of Exeter and RAP, where he coordinates a lot of their heating work. Richard, please go ahead. We welcome you to make your remarks.
Thanks so much, Maguri, and good morning, everyone. Nice to see you all. I hope wherever you are, the sun is shining. The sun has finally come out in the UK after what feels like months and months of rain. So feeling positive at last. And in the UK, we do have a new government, so it feels like quite an exciting time for the energy transition. First of all, a bit about the Regulatory Assistance Project. RAP is an international NGO and think tank. We work with governments around the world on energy policy, providing advisory services and offering advice on best practice of how policy and regulation can drive the cleaning up of energy systems around the world. In RAP, I'm based in the European team, but as Maguri has said, I work a lot on heating and coordinate much of our heat work. And as part of that, I'm the lead coordinator of a project which we call Heat Pump Phase 2, which is an international project supported by the Crux Alliance, an international conglomerate of foundations and funders. And through this work, we have now been considering the issue of heat pumps for well over 3 years, and hopefully for another 3 years into the future, if we're awarded continuation grants and more funding. And I expect we will be, because this work is just so important. So why heat pumps? It's a specific topic, it's quite niche for a webinar, but potentially a huge area of energy transition and therefore huge requirements for energy policy and change. When we look at global scenarios for cleaning up the energy sector, for heating of spaces and hot water, and indeed some industry, heat pumps are expected to dominate. When we look at the International Energy Agency's scenario for 2050 under a net zero pathway, heat pumps provide around a quarter of all heat around the world. And that's a significant change from where we are today. It really is an explosive growth that's needed. And when we look at national level studies as well, we see the same results. In the UK, we're talking about around 80% of homes having heat pumps by 2050, similar shares in other Northern European countries. And actually, even when we look at warmer places, currently I've been doing some work in Spain, but even places in the Southern Hemisphere, Australia perhaps, and maybe we'll discuss this, in South America, a role for heat pumps too, because heat pumps can provide cooling, of course. A reversible heat pump provides both heating and cooling, and heat pumps are a very efficient way of producing hot water. The value of heat pumps being primarily that the heat that comes out of a heat pump is extracted from the air or the ground or the water, and that's a renewable resource, and it's a clean, zero carbon resource. And heat pumps use electricity very, very efficiently to get that heat out of the environment. And typically we see 3 or 4 units of heat being extracted from the environment for every unit of electricity used. And what that means is that the heat that comes out of a heat pump currently is extremely clean. And as electricity systems around the world become cleaner, as renewables grow, and we see that happening very, very quickly, heat pumps become ever cleaner. So overall, heat pumps vital to a clean energy system, not just in countries which are known for having significant heat demands, but also around the world. And I think that's where we're going with this webinar today. We're looking at places that you wouldn't necessarily consider heat pumps as obvious solutions, but I think across the course of the project, we've learned that that is the case, and that their role is much more wider than we'd originally assumed. Central to the work that we've been doing on this project is something called the Heat Pump Toolkit. Hopefully I'm just sharing my screen now and people can see that. This toolkit is an output which we created across the project partners, the partners being the Regulatory Assistance Project, CLASP, GBPN, who are running the workshop today, and Agora Energiewende, the German energy think tank, who have joined us for this second version of the toolkit. This version came out in late 2022, and we're updating the toolkit to come out in November 2024. The toolkit is a guide for policymakers around the world to provide broad principles about how heat pumps need to be supported and driven by policy. And it looks at international case studies and best practice, and it provides advice too. And what you can see on the right-hand side here is that basically to support heat pumps at scale, there are 4 key tools needed. And we've used the model of a Greek temple here. Firstly, you need to ensure that the economics of heat pumps are good. And this includes considering running costs and looking at environmental taxation and carbon costs and so on to ensure that basically they're cheaper to run than fossil fuel heating systems. So that's the first pillar. The second pillar is about finance and supporting households to and building owners to actually fit the heat pumps in the first place. That's about making sure that cash is available to people, and that includes things like grant schemes, loans, and more novel offerings like heat as a service scheme, where people pay for the heat pump across the course of its lifetime. Third, we talk about regulation. Eventually, regulation will need to bite to ensure that heat pumps are deployed at scale. This could include regulation for new buildings, the use of appliance standards, and so on. And they're the 3 core policy and regulatory pillars that we know are vital to support heat pumps. And finally, this all needs to be tied together by a strong foundation of coordination and communication. Without this integrated planning for heat pumps, and without communication both to the market, installers, and to households, the market will not grow quickly enough. And we know that from direct experience, looking at countries where heat pumps have expanded rapidly, for example, in the Nordic countries. And so overall, a whole package of heat pump support is needed, particularly if we're going to support the growth of heat pumps at the scale implied by the Paris Agreement, which implies really, really rapid growth. But equally, I think we also know that there will be market benefits to mass heat pump adoption. We're seeing that with the falling cost of electricity and the running costs and efficiency of heat pumps. And to really reap the benefits and to meet our energy and climate goals, governments need to consider really coordinated and strategic support for heat pumps. So that's the toolkit. We have a new version. Sorry, a bit of background noise. We have a new version coming out in November this year, which will be updated with a number of case studies. And we're going to hear about some of those case studies today. So I will now hand over back to Peter Graham of GBPN, and he can lead on with the discussions. Thanks, Peter.
Thanks, Richard, and welcome everybody. It's great to see you all, and great to be part of this event as well. And as Richard said, we've been involved in the development of the heat pump toolkit since in version 1 and now in version 2, of course. And the GBPN has been working for over a decade trying to support government and industry to develop and implement best practices in building energy policies. And one of the areas which is really certainly on the agenda globally now is the process of electrification and moving towards net zero buildings. And so we're trying to understand what are the roles of building regulations and supporting policies in enabling efficient technologies like heat pumps to be incorporated into new construction and also renovation work. And in terms of the development of the next edition of this toolkit, we're obviously looking at increasing the number of case studies and providing more insight into markets which weren't covered in the first toolkit edition. So that's why we have these fantastic speakers today from countries which we're kind of are geographically located in the global south. And we have countries which represent also markets dominated by new construction, as well as markets which need to desperately renovate existing building stock. So we've got a balance of perspectives to cover today. So without further ado, what I'd like to do is to introduce our panel for the webinar. And so our first speaker today is Rachel Wilkinson. She's with the Energy Efficiency Council in Australia, and she's a senior advisor in policy and partnerships. Rachel has worked in both the public and private sector over the last decade, and prior to the Energy Efficiency Council, she was providing policy and advocacy support to thousands of businesses with the Australian Industry Group. Welcome, Rachel. It's great to have you here. It's very interesting to also have an insight from Australia on renewable, on energy efficiency policy, and also plans for perhaps roadmaps and zero emissions transformation, which is exciting. Following Rachel, we will hear from Totok Sulicentio from Indonesia. Totok is the director of Namara Mandiri, a green building and energy audit consulting company, and his core expertise is in running energy consultancy. He's been in that industry for more than 20 years, and he covers energy efficiency and sustainable development in the building industry and also in industry sectors. He's been contributing to a lot of international and national initiatives in Indonesia and around ASEAN, including a really important organization in Indonesia, the Indonesian Energy Conservation and Efficiency Society, or MASCE, a really important group promoting energy efficiency in Indonesia, among many other connections and networks. So welcome, Totok. Great to have you here. He's also been, I should just mention, he's also been a great contributor to GBPN's work in Indonesia through the HIDUP coalition. We're going to then move from Indonesia to Chile, and we will hear from Paulette Farron-Chol, who is with the Regulatory Assistance Project. She's consultant and regional coordinator. And Paulette is an international consultant and legal expert. She specializes in energy decarbonisation and public and private partnerships. And she's got a master's degree in international energy from Sciences Po in Paris and a law degree with honours from UNAM in Mexico, and has been working for many years on legal and regulatory analysis, infrastructure projects, energy and competition law across many continents. With RAP, Regulatory Assistance Project, she's collaborating with India and the Global Opportunities Program, and like many on the panel is trying to advance the clean energy transition and support decarbonisation. Welcome, Paulette. And bringing up the end of the panel, we're going to hear from Yathrath Kumar Sharma. He is with the Collaborative Labelling and Appliance Standard Program, or CLASP. Many would know the organisation by its acronym, probably, CLASP. And he is a program associate. Yathrath is working with CLASP based in New Delhi in India, and is supporting the Indian team in developing appliance efficiency policies and compliance-related work. And he's got 7 years of experience in energy auditing, renewable energy and energy efficiency-related projects in India, Philippines, Grenada, and Guyana. And welcome. It's going to be very interesting to hear the perspective of you and what's going on in India as well. So a great panel. As was mentioned by Richard and also by Magure, the idea of this panel is to hear some case studies from these different countries about where we're at with the deployment of heat pumps and what the policy environment looks like. So now I'm going to ask Rachel if she would like to take the floor and lead us on.
Sure. Are the slides being shared? Yes.
There we go.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Just wait till we're on the slide. Oh, beautiful. Thanks very much. And I'll let you know when to change. I've already been introduced, but I'm Rachel Wilkinson. I'm a senior advisor with the Energy Efficiency Council here in Australia. We call ourselves the EEC. The EEC is Australia's peak body for energy management, electrification and decarbonisation, and we've got a membership of businesses, universities and governments who are all working to guide Australia on the path to an efficient and prosperous net zero economy. Next slide, please. So for a quick market overview, like many places, Australia is seeing an explosion of interest in heat pumps. Richard alluded to this earlier, but it should be no surprise, reverse cycle air conditioners are very popular here because they heat and, very importantly, they cool. We had about 1 million of those sold in 2022. That might sound like not very much to people in larger markets, but Australia is a relatively small market. So we've got a population of about 26 million people, and we've got about 10 or 11 million dwellings. So 1 million is quite a large number in that regard. The other heat pump product that's gaining popularity at the moment are heat pump hot water systems, in part because there were some very attractive government incentives introduced in around 2020. And within a few years of those incentives being introduced, we saw the market for that product grow fourfold. Now, before we continue the presentation, it's important to note that Australia is a federation. We've got 6 states and 2 territories, and these jurisdictions have the powers to make laws, to undertake regulatory interventions, as well as run their own financial programs. So the approach to products like heat pumps and their install can differ around the country. This presentation, I would never have time to cover all of that nuance, so please don't take this to be comprehensive, but rather it's intended to just give you a bit of a flavour for what's happening here. If we could go to the next slide. So in terms of regulatory approach, Australia is unfortunately behind many of our international peers in terms of our regulatory approach to energy efficiency. In fact, research has actually found that Australia's energy standards are about 55% worse than comparable countries and climate zones. Our houses are often likened to tents, and people from much colder parts of the world do complain about how cold they are in their homes in Australia. To the degree that's a bit of a running joke on social media. But we are doing some things about it. So we do have a national construction code, which applies to most new builds in this country. And that code requires new builds to meet what we call a 7-star standard under the Nationwide Energy Rating Scheme, which we call NatHERS. A lot of factors come into getting that star rating, but heat pumps can contribute. We also see thermal performance improvements there that also maximise the performance of heat pumps, particularly those reverse cycle air conditioners. We are trying to ban new gas connections in new builds. So in some states, the Australian Capital Territory and Victoria have done that. And in the case of Victoria, we're seeing the introduction of minimum rental standards that would see the replacement of inefficient gas and electric water systems and heaters to be replaced with efficient heat pumps. In the case of the banning of new gas connections and minimum rental standards in Victoria, this is actually underpinned by a whole other thing, which is the state's gas substitution roadmap. So we can go to the next slide now. In terms of financial support, as I mentioned, there's never time to cover up on the whole of Australia. So I'm going to use Victoria as an example. Victoria, for reference, is the 2nd largest economy in Australia. It delivers just under a quarter of the nation's GDP. So what happens in its market is significant. So in Victoria, there's a couple of noteworthy things to mention. So we have the Victorian Energy Upgrades Program, which we call the VEU. So how does the VEU work? Basically, we have large energy retailers which are required to acquire and surrender Victorian Energy Efficiency Certificates, and we call those VEECs, and they've got to meet an annual target set in Victorian legislation. Accredited persons that carry out upgrade activities by installing energy efficient products like heat pumps in residential or sometimes actually non-residential premises can generate VEECs. And the greenhouse gas savings associated with the installation of an efficient product and or the decommissioning of an inefficient product determines the number of VEECs that can be created. And the level of incentive or discount received by households and businesses is going to vary based on market activity for those certificates. So that's an example of an energy efficiency scheme here in Victoria. There are some similar ones in other states, but as I said, no time. So Solar Victoria also have a rebate, which is like a flat $1,000 available for households eligible for heat pump hot water systems. And what's interesting here is those incentives can be stacked. So if you're replacing your hot water system with a nice new heat pump hot water system, you can access the $1,000 from Solar Victoria, and you can also get a discount from the VEU. The other thing that's interesting about these schemes is that they can also be used to drive quality improvements. So they can delist poor performing product, which can help get some of that off the market and let consumers know that it's no good. And they can also drive other outcomes, such as putting requirements on how much refrigerant can be in a product, for example. And then finally, we are seeing social housing upgrades around the country. For example, the Victorian government is working on the upgrade of about 35,000 social housing properties. So those are for low-income people to live in, many of which are getting upgraded heat pumps in them. So if we go to the next slide, we can have a quick look around Australia. So we have something called a renewable energy target, and through this we can generate small technology certificates, or STCs, and again works a little bit like the VEU. It's essentially a certificate program, but that's nationwide. We've got a couple of low interest or no interest loan schemes. So this enables householders to access cheap finance to undertake energy efficiency upgrades, including heat pumps. And we see a few good examples of this in Tasmania and the Australian Capital Territory. And then we've got the Household Energy Upgrades Fund, which is $1 billion fund to provide low-cost finance for energy efficiency upgrades in Australian homes. And that's mostly for larger scale examples. So if we could go to the next slide. Challenges. So like a lot of places, we've got skill shortages. We don't really have enough plumbers and refrigeration technicians and electricians to get all of this work done. So that's obviously a source of anxiety for policymakers around the country. We've got this lack of harmonisation between our jurisdictions. So I mentioned everyone's kind of doing different things around the country. We're already a small market, so this can make it hard to scale, and it can just make it very confusing for industry because obligations kind of slightly change depending on where you're operating. So obviously, if you're operating in a few places, that's suboptimal. Standards and regulation, I've mentioned we're behind many of our peers, and this has led to product dumping and other issues in our market. We have seen examples of boom and bust programs and incentives that sort of create market distortions that are well-intentioned, but ultimately had some negative unintended consequences. And then local manufacturing has been very focused, for example, in heat pumps on gas appliances and electric resistive. A lot of our interventions are sort of moving away from those products. So Australia has an existential decision to make about how much we want to support those local manufacturers to continue to operate here, or whether or not we're going to let that capacity go potentially. So those are sort of some of the key challenges. If we go to the next slide. We've also got some opportunities. So electrification and the transition away from gas. We often talk about electrifying everything. We've obviously got a good reason to do that in terms of our net zero commitment. Australia, of course, is signed up to the Paris Agreement. We've got to do that deep decarbonisation, and heat pumps can play a big role in that. There is a growing acceptance in policy land and around the states and territories that more needs to be done to assist with getting off gas, to help with that, including because of the high price of gas here at the moment as well. Now, standards and regulatory, I've mentioned it as a challenge, but it's also an opportunity because we've got nowhere to go but up, really. So if we undertake some of that reform and tighten things up, we can see better outcomes in our market. Energy efficiency scheme reform. So I told you a bit about the VEU. That's been around for about 15 years. There's going to be a review of that so that we can make sure it's fit for purpose for the next 15, and similar things are going on in schemes around the rest of the country. And then finally, again, a challenge, but also an opportunity with local manufacturing. So, if local manufacturers can capture the benefits of this transition, there's potentially a big opportunity there locally for jobs and innovation and all of the good things that come with manufacturing. And that's 10 minutes and I am finished. Thank you, Peter.
Thanks, Rachel. A tour de force. It's interesting that the examples are coming from Victoria, which is probably that and Tasmania are the two most heating dominated states in the country. But later on, I might dig in a little bit more about what the landscape looks like across Australia. But I was also a little bit the image you've got of all roofs and no trees is quite something as well. And I would just say that's also the challenge in terms of the built environment and keeping things cool or keeping things thermally comfortable also has to address urban planning in some respects too. So, but I will come back to you on a couple of questions, I think, later on also about potentially whether Australia needs more oomph for minimum performance standards and whether we, and also because of your background, maybe we could dive into a little bit about the role of the private sector in all of this as well. So thank you very much. And if you have questions for Rachel, feel free to put them in the chat, and Magure and Rahema will moderate those for us for our Q&A session later on. Okay, well, thank you very much. Now let's move from a cool part of the world, Victoria, Australia, to Jakarta, Indonesia. And Tontok, would you like to take your presentation on?
Thank you very much, Peter. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening for different places in the continent. Let me begin with two sectors that are target opportunities for implementing heat pump. There is building and industrial sectors. Talking about building, based on building is actually under Ministry of Public Work and Housing. And if we start from residential building and housing, actually, there is no specific regulation regarding heat pump in building. We know that there is, in Indonesia, we need more space cooling rather than space heating. So, of course, there is no specific regulation on heat pump in building. But now, since there is government ambitious constructing the low-income housing in Indonesia, actually, since 2017, actually, there is target 1 million housing in Indonesia every year. Even during the COVID, there is a bit get down up to 700,000 up to 800,000. But last report last year actually is big comeback to 1.2 million low-income housing already built in Indonesia. And there is actually one, like 15 years ago, there is what we call it AC air conditioner water heater that was exists in Indonesia, but actually not last long because it was displaced by solar cooling system, flat plate solar cooling system, and so on. So the people it's still using conventional air conditioner with different solar heating system for yeah, medium and high housing people in the complex. And if we move in the religious building, I don't think that there is maybe only small opportunities. Business building, I think, is the most potential implementing heat pump, especially like a hospital, restaurant, and hotels. That was, I have some experience, not too many, but there is high potential to implement for heat pump in this area. Social and culture building, I don't think so. Only small potential, but special function building, I don't. Yeah, I think some specific building there is potential. And if we move to the industrial sector, there is the huge potential for heat pump in Indonesia, as reported by Ministry of Industry, that actually currently already 103 industrial areas spread out to different islands. So Java Island is the most number of industrial complex, and then Sumatra Island, Kalimantan Island, and Sulawesi Island. And then the government in the near future, there will be additional 25 complex or industrial area. Please move to the next slide. All right. Yeah. In terms of energy consumption, actually, the last 5 years, actually, there was shifting the largest energy consumption from transportation to industries. And if we calculate now to the report 2023, actually, industrial sector will dominate 45% for energy consumption, followed by transportation, and then building is like 17% is sum of commercial and household, and the rest others is only 0.9%. And industry is actually energy need 2023 is driven by uptake of coal and natural gas consumption in the industrial sector. And you may see that the potential is between up to 30% in every sectors, and transportation specifically is up to 35%. Next, please. And then we move to the new regulation. Actually, there is energy conservation government regulation number 33 2023. It has been issued. It revoked the previous government. Now the government is differentiate the upstream and downstream management, especially for the definition and the implementation. There was previously actually all the same with the total of energy consumption is 6,000 ton oil equivalent, and then the new regulation will be divided as shown there, like energy production and exploitation is still 6,000 ton oil equivalent, and then transportation and industry sector there is 4,000 ton oil equivalent per year, and then building is dramatically reduced the benchmark only 500 ton oil equivalent. That why building will be target of the program energy conservation for the building. Next, please. Talking about the green building movement, actually, I'm also one of the initiator for Green Building Council in Indonesia, established 2009, and we have a green ship rating tools that developed by Green Building Council Indonesia, and then there was local government regulation for Jakarta. There, what we call it government regulation number 38 2012, actually regarding green building, and then Ministry of Public Work 2021 there was new government very strict in related with green building regulation, and also green building performance assessment is part of building permit and building occupancy permit for the building. But I think there will be in the next, actually Indonesia green building regulation are improving, but are still insufficient to achieve widespread implementation in many cities in Indonesia. Maybe in 5 years there will be all right. Green Building Council, there has been 10 representative along the countries along the continent, along the island of Indonesia, and some cities there was major green building regulation like Bandung, Semarang, Surabaya, Makassar, and Manado. Next, please. Yes, just talking about the technical thing. I don't think this is a general concept of heat recovery principle. Please next slide, please. Yeah, this is what myself have experience implemented in industry. So we can compare the traditional chiller plus boiler compare with heat pump chillers. So in traditional application for air conditioning system, there was need for heating is usually they use boiler with oil, with gas and other type of fuel, and compare with heat pump system and heat recovery. Of course, we I think was already mentioned by other speakers. Next, please. And then if we look at the heat pump application, can be if we are talking about air conditioning system, can be in the air side, so like a terminal reheat, we can use 38 up to 50 degrees C with air-to-air heat exchanger for the cooling system. And then for domestic water heat, there is huge potential as well. Dehumidification, space heating, process heating, and of course, it is mostly will be happen in industry. Next, please. Yeah, this is location heat pump. If we considering that there is existing air conditioning system, chiller system that with the additional heat pump, we can inject the cooling, the waste cooling from the evaporator of heat pump to inject into living chilled water evaporator is the example for application 1, and application 2 can be injected into entering chilled water system, and so on and so forth. So number 3 injected in the entering for the cooling tower. Application 4 is injected leaving cooling tower, and then yeah, option 5 is injected into the condenser. Next, please. And then this is the comparison that this is implemented in industry, food and industry. Actually, they have to use 2 units of chiller is 352 kilowatt with the living 2.7 and 12 for evaporator. Sorry, I can see the presentation. Yeah. Okay, just move on the result of the energy calculation and also operating cost. So we can compare with using the first column, actually heat pump chillers, and we see that the total operating cost only 640,000 rupiah Indonesian currency, compare with cooling chiller plus boiler with electric boiler. It can be 10 times or 8 times the cost operation, compare with gas like 3 times, and then compare with fuel oil, is can be like 4 times. Next, please. And yeah, this is like a summary. Actually, MASKE, the association of the energy efficiency and energy conservation society in Indonesia, there was last year conducting workshop on heat pump, and the benefit of heat pump actually is high efficiency technology. For every 1 input can give 6 output, and then of course it can be combined both cooling and heating together in one system. and some areas economic system can be utilized and already implemented in many areas: hotel, hospital, restaurant, and of course various industrial subsector. And yeah, Indonesia is largest food and beverage and pharmacy industries and fourth food beer producer worldwide. And of course, the challenging is actually promoting heat pump in Indonesia should be focused on addressing the technology need, and then also we have to give them capacity building, development stage, and so on. And then the next approach will be made the project consultant, and then to promote the operation and maintenance professional. This is of course for the existing building, existing industries, they can replace with especially the boiler, and of course the maintenance, keep the performance consistently and optimum level. And then the last, of course, the depth discussion, and especially for the building to have a better awareness among the stakeholders. I think that's all. Give you back to Peter. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Pak Totok. Really interesting, and it's also interesting to see where you see the opportunities arising for heat pumps in a warm climate and also in such a rapidly expanding market, in terms of the construction sector. I'd love to come back to you later on and understand a little bit more about the role that the building regulations are playing in perhaps promoting the market for heat pumps as well. Fantastic. Okay, so again, moving from warm perhaps to cooler, back to Chile now. And Paulette, would you like to take the floor?
Thank you very much. Yes. So I will take you a bit around Chile. So Chile has, can we go to the next, please? Chile has very particular geographical and climate diversity, and this causes very varied heating and cooling needs across the country. So the country is a very long, thin country, over 4,000 kilometers, with very varying climates. In the northern, actually, we have the Atacama Desert, the driest desert in the world, that has very extreme temperatures, variations. Cooling is critical during the day. Heating might be needed during the night. Then the center is more of a Mediterranean climate, where there actually needs for cooling and heating around the year, depending on the season. And then the south, we have very extreme cold, humid temperatures, and then heating is absolutely essential. But as well, there are variations within the heating sources along the country. So we have more electric heaters in the north, in the center more liquefied gas, and then the south firewood. And it's important to notice that actually firewood is still king in the use of heating source in Chile. It is the most common heating source, and it's the most traditional use because of its culture, actually. So it covers over 40% of heating source around the country, and in some regions, especially the southern parts, it covers more than 90% of the heating source. So this causes very considerable environmental concerns and air quality concerns as well. Actually, the particulates emitted by firewood cause 85% of the national particulates in the country. So that is considerable. And there's an important problem about forest management as well. And it's important just to notice that, or to mention, that firewood market is not regulated whatsoever. So the use of firewood is not the best. They use very humid and bad quality firewood for heating, which is even less efficient. Nonetheless, the government has started to implement several programs, policies to move, to tackle this, and they are aiming to reduce by 70% this particulate emissions from heating by 2050. They have implemented several policies and programs, and the goal is for actually electric heating to reach more than half of housings by 2050 and over 70% of apartments. Next, please. So some of the regulatory policies that have been implemented, there is one very particular that it's very worth to mention that it's actually called a heat and cold strategy. So Chile is very well aware that it has needs for both of them. So this is a very forward-looking plan. It was implemented in 2021. Well, it was launched in 2021, and it is aiming to reduce 65% of greenhouse gas emissions from heating and cooling. And it is aiming to have 80% of sustainable energy use for heating and cooling. This would include renewable energy sources, but still biomass. So of course, you can imagine that just getting away from biomass is not as easy due to the cultural use. This program also considers the use of district heating that would comprise use of heat pumps as well. And it is organized in 4 pillars that would consider a very global or holistic perception with sustainable transition, institutions and regulations, knowledge sharing, and training. There have been some other policies implemented as well. For example, the National Energy Policy, that it is completely focused on heating and cooling. And it is aiming to reach at least 500,000 houses connected to district heating networks by 2050. And there's also the Residential Energy Transition Strategy. This was as well a very global, well, very big forward-looking program. And the highlight of this one is that it was considering the regulation of the firewood market to improve as well. And all the goals of this is to have more efficient residential heating and the energy metrics in the heating. There's also the Energy Efficiency National Plan that as well considers district heating. And there are some standards are starting to being implemented regarding the mandatory energy efficiency labeling for public buildings and appliances, but that is just on the incipient stages. Next, please. So there are some programs in place as well that could help the deployment of heat pumps in Chile. There is not a specific program just focused on heat pumps at this point, but yes, into getting more efficient sources. So one of them was the heater replacement program. This was a focalized program implemented in 2011 that was focused to lower emissions from residential wood burning. So the goal, it was just to replace 190,000 heaters. But unfortunately, after 10 years, only 18% of those were actually replaced, given some financing difficulties. And the problem of this program is that it was designed not only focused in the most efficient side of the heating technologies, but it covered also more efficient firewood burners and pellets. So in this program, the winner of all the technologies were pellets. And here's where they realized that actually, well, such high upfront costs for heat pumps were not as attractive. And there was no knowledge sharing about the overall costs of the heat pumps or all the benefits and the energy efficiency benefits after them. So in this sense, pellet technology was the most used. But still, the program had a success. In some regions, there was a reduction of emissions between 12 and 40% from the heating sector in households. So that was considerable. And there was a price reduction as well. So there is a potential to implement a better program for the future, just focusing better in more efficient technologies. There's also a Rechange Your Heat program. This was aimed to have some discounts on the electricity tariffs in order to foment the change into electric heating. There's also electric subsidies and other programs that are just being implemented to support thermal conditioning, household improvements, energy efficiency. So here, just a bit of the recommendation is to have a careful evaluation of the technology. Other technologies with overall costs, not only upfront costs, and the overall benefits. And the most important part is enhanced education and awareness, because again, the use of firewood is a very in-depth traditional cultural use. So it's not going to be so easy just to shift the mind into using other sources. Next, please. Chile as well has been quite a pioneer in the region in terms of implementing, looking forward into climate issues. So actually, it was the first country in the region to implement the carbon tax. Unfortunately, it was not the best designed. So it was a very low carbon tax, only at $5 per ton of CO2, which is very far away from the over $32 estimated by the government as the social cost of carbon. There is just a caveat here, so that this carbon tax, emissions from stationary sources using biomass as the primary energy source are exempt from this tax. So there are so many aspects of room of improvement of this tax. Well, still the country is aware of the areas of opportunity and the needs of improvement. They have already set the goal to increase it to $35 per ton by 2030. And there are all other instruments for green bonds, for example, for financing large-scale heat pumps, and they are just starting to implement green tax emission compensation system and the national emissions certificate program that is just starting to be in place. And here, well, the most potential improvement is a well-designed or most adapted design to enhance carbon pricing to reflect the social cost of carbon. Next, please. So the challenges and opportunities in Chile here that, well, definitely the biggest challenge is the change of mindset of the use of firewood as a traditional source. As well, we need to consider that actually 17% of households in Chile did not have access to energy for heating. So there is a considerable energy poverty that in the government's policy that they need to shift. So that's why they started to implement all of those programs despite the climate change and the environmental aspect of it. So as well, we need to, another challenge is that actually heat pumps and cleaner technologies still have quite high upfront costs. So they have not yet found the right way to balance that, and the lack of awareness, the lack of information regarding the overall costs being less in heat pump usage than traditional heaters. Just to give you an idea, in Chile, a heat pump might be 4 times more expensive than a traditional firewood burner. So of course, people might not have the incentive. And since the unregulated firewood market, which is worth around 800 million a year, well, there's no incentives in certain sectors to change that. Another challenge as well is that it's not easy to implement just a one size fits all policy or program to change this, since we've seen all the climatic, economic, and geographical needs, geographical particularities. They need different requirements for heating and or cooling around the year. So they need to do very focalized areas and policies in that sense. And they're just in the incipient stages in so many areas. But there are several opportunities. So the government is already aware of where they need to go, that they need to start, and they have started the ball rolling. And there's a huge significant environmental benefit potential as well. So actually heat pumps emit up to 300% less CO2 in domestic heating than a natural gas heater, for example. So the government is aware that they should shift, but they are still not completely sure about the magic of heat pumps as a technology. So they are still considering a broad spectrum. They are already considering programs. They are aware of the potential of district heating systems as well. And there could be a considerable savings in terms of money for the healthcare sector as well, and reduction of emissions that actually, along with district heating, for example, could achieve a 99% of reduction of particulate pollution from heating in the households. And the next one, please. So in general, there's a quite positive and promising landscape in Chile for heat pumps. They are still in the incipient stages. There's a very big room for improvement, a lot of lessons learned. And another challenge that I forgot to mention before is that actually there's not a lot of public information available. So that hinders transparency and the goals. So, but I mean, the government, I believe is going in the right direction. Things are being implemented, and we are sure that the country would go a bit further into implementing heat pumps. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that. That is raising a number of other really nutty issues for us to consider, like the cultural connection to various fuel types. I think it's the same. There's a resistance to change, and it's more difficult when there's a deep-seated cultural connection to things like burning wood for heat or cooking with gas. This is an area that we need to reflect on, I think, and I'd like to come back to you later too. I'm interested to know whether or not the health impacts of these sorts of traditional technologies is potentially a driver for change there too. So thank you very much. Okay, so now we're on to our last panelist, Yathrath from CLASP. Would you like to tell us what the situation is in India?
Thank you. I am Yatharth Kumar Sharma, and I work as a program associate in CLASP, and I'm also certified energy manager by Government of India. And in CLASP, we work with government across the world to improve the energy efficiency of the appliances and equipment which we use in our daily life. And we have offices in 5 countries, and we implemented the project in almost like 90 countries. In India, we work with the Bureau of Energy Efficiency to make energy efficiency, or I can say like minimum energy performance standards for the appliances and equipments. We also work with BEE to create the awareness about energy efficient appliances by making small like videos. And we also work supporting Bureau of Energy Efficiency in compliance and testing of the energy efficient appliances. Apart from that, we also work with our neighboring countries like Bhutan to harmonize the energy efficiency policies or star rating program of India. And these are like the photos of recent energy efficiency policies which we have launched in India. Like for example, we have launched policies for packaged boiler, commercial beverage cooler, solar inverter. And for related to compliance, we have done a workshop for market surveillance workshop, and we have also done like cold chain event in 2024. So if we talk about what is happening in India in field of like water and space heater, then in financial year in financial year 2023, almost 16 million units of water heater are sold, and this is like close to 280 million USD, and it is anticipated that the market will grow with a CAGR of 7.15%. But out of these 16 million, 64% of all the water heater we sold is electric instantaneous water heater, and 32% is electric storage water heater, and the remaining 4% is gas water heater. And if we talk about heat pumps, then it almost close to zero. Only like 0.16 million units are sold in India. And if we talk about like space heater, then the market is close to 95 million USD in 2023, and it is anticipated that it will grow with a CAGR of 6.76%. And if we talk about like energy efficiency policies, then in India, we have a mandatory energy efficiency policies for electric storage water heater. And we have also energy efficiency policy for solar water heater. But at present, we don't have any energy efficiency policies for heat pumps, which are used for water and space heating purpose. Like I told you before, like in year 2023, only like 0.01 million units of the heat pumps are sold. But it is anticipated that the market will grow with a CAGR of 5.80%. So we have done like initial consultation with the stakeholders to find out what are the challenges they are facing to promote the heat pump in India. So these are like the few challenges. For example, like a high initial cost. So if we compare the cost of heat pump with electric water heater, it is almost 5 to 6 times more. And second, it is like very difficult to retrofit in the existing building. So like for the existing building, if I want to replace a electric water heater with a heat pump based water heater in my home, I need to change my entire like plumbing system. We need to install like new pipes. And there is like very limited use of the heat pump based water heater and space heater. Considering the geographical location of the India, we have a majority of the months like warm and humid climate is there. So the use is very, very less. Second, consumers are not at all aware about it, and we don't have like local skills and expertise. Most of the heat pump which are sold in India are like coming from the neighboring countries. And apart from that, the most important thing is at present in India, we don't have any test standards. So all the industries, all manufacturers, they have their own test in-house test facilities, and they have their own in-house test methods to test the efficiency of the heat pump. But there is like no centralized or one test standards in India. And apart from that, we don't have like energy efficiency or minimum energy performance standards for the heat pump. So to bridge these challenges, CLASP in India is working with manufacturers to find out what is the like market and technology is there in the India, and through market and technology assessment. So we are like we are coordinating with the stakeholders to find out what challenges they are facing in promoting heat pumps in India. And we are also working with the Bureau of Indian Standard, which is a national standard body of India, to make or update the standards for the heat pump. So because of like our work, the Bureau of Indian Standard, they started drafting the test standards for heat pumps which are used for water heating purpose. And apart from that, we are also like supporting Bureau of Energy Efficiency to make minimum energy performance standards for the heat pumps. So, like I told you, there are like few challenges which hindering, or I can say which stop the use of heat pumps, especially in the residential sector. So the biggest challenge is, if we see the average annual temperature in India, then 90% of in India we have average temperature above 22 degree, and above 22 degree we don't require space heaters, and we don't even require water heaters. And if we see heating degree days, then apart from like few states or few cities in the north and northeast, remaining India have like heating degree days is less than 100 days, or I can say less than 200 days. So there is like very limited use of the heat pumps in the residential sector. So this doesn't mean that in India there is no heat pump potential. In India, we have a heat pump potential, but in industries or in commercial sector. So if we see like industry sector contribute almost 27% of the India's GDP in financial year 23-24, and it's increasing continuously. So, and if in industries required hot water for many applications, for example, like industries required hot water for the pre-treatment process. All big industries, they have their own food courts where cooking and cleaning of the utensils and cleaning of the vegetables are happening with hot water. Even like boiler feed water pump can also be replaced with heat pumps, or any process heat wherever it required less than 120 degrees centigrade, that also can be replaced with a heat pump. And if by installing the heat pump, we can replace coal, diesel, kerosene, LPG, natural gas, electricity, and furnace oil. So basically, like at present, in majority of the industries, they are using fossil fuels to heat the water in the boiler, and that boiled water is used for the process purpose. So that can be replaced with a heat pump. And apart from that, like the same like my other friends from Australia and Indonesia, they also mentioned that their climatic condition is also warm. Similarly, like other neighboring countries of the India, like Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Indonesia, and they all are facing the same problem. There also the heat pump potential in the residential sector is very less, but the heat pump potential in industries and commercial sector is very, very high. So by knowledge sharing can also be done. And we have done a pilot project in one of the automobile industry. So this particular industry manufacture four-wheelers, or I can say a car, and they have their paint shop, and they have to maintain the temperature of the paint at one particular temperature. They have to maintain the paint. So earlier they used boilers for that, but now they replace that boiler with a heat pump. So what they found that their energy bill is reduced by almost 67%. So earlier their like primary energy source was LPG, and after installing heat pump, their like primary source of energy changed to electricity or water source heat pump is there. And earlier they use like fuel almost like 650 kgs per day of the LPG they are using, and apart from that 700 kilowatt hours also for electricity also they are using. But after that, after replacing with the heat pump, they are using almost close to 1800 units per day. And energy bill before installing heat pump was somewhere around 12 million. And after installing it reduces to 4 million. So almost 67% reduction is there. So this is like only the one case study, one pilot which we have done in India. And so the main reason to show this, to show what is the potential of the heat pumps in India. And with this, like my last slide, and thank you.
Thank you so much. That was really interesting. It seems to be a theme looking at where there is a scale opportunity for installation of heat pumps and the opportunities for industry. I'm interested also in again, the market dynamics. We might come back to that in our discussion session, where you've got so much new building going on, whether that be, in the real estate development market or in industry, whether there's an opportunity for a kind of a step change or some scaling opportunities within the new construction, new development market. Noting that you mentioned that it's difficult to retrofit some of the existing buildings. I also wonder, this is something we could pick up as a theme too in the discussion. A number of people have talked about impressive cost savings and also energy savings, and I'm wondering what the role of the private sector is in that, if there is actually a business case for scaling up, and if so, what does that look like? So thank you very much for some really interesting presentations, and certainly quite a diversity of market situations, climatic situations, governance frameworks, and so on. So there's a lot to really unpick here. I'd like to also bring Richard Lowe's back into the panel now for the discussion session and pick up on some of these themes. And I wanted to start with you, Richard. We've been working on the toolkit and looking at international policy, best practices and policies that work. Having listened to the experience of our panelists in these different countries, can you see any common themes, whether they be barriers or opportunities arising, and anything that perhaps the toolkit covers as potential steps forward for these countries?
Thanks, Peter, for bringing back in, and thanks to all the presenters. Fascinating to see all the different parts of the world, really. I think there are two things that stand out. So one is just the need to sort new build standards everywhere. We know from experience in countries with heat demand that it's so much easier to fit heat pumps and clean heating solutions when you're building a building. The examples given of having to need new pipes as a requirement is that we sort out new builds rapidly. And I think when we look at the world overall, we're expecting about half of the buildings that exist in 2050 to be new builds. So we can tackle this soon, and it'll be much easier to try and tackle it early. And there's clearly a role for building codes and appliance standards at a global level there. Secondly, I think there's just a big difference in terms of the technology that's needed for countries to have significant cooling demand. You know, if you've got no space heating demand whatsoever, it's different, and you'll have cooling demand. And what I think the innovation, to go to your point about innovation, Peter, is that there is a role for new models and new solutions which aren't widely on the market that can provide cooling and hot water at the same time, because that can be done extremely efficiently if you're combining both of those countries which have a combination of heating. There's a role for all-in-one solutions, and so I think that there's a real room for innovation in the market, and I think that's where the private sector's got to lead. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. Yeah, good point. I think this is obviously bread and butter for the GBPN, looking at building regulations and what we can do to create the requirements in the space for incorporating innovative technologies. But I think part of the issue also is, and one thing that I'd like to probably come to the panel with is, we've talked about the technologies and we've sort of talked about the opportunities there. And I'm interested to come back to a couple of the drivers. So one of the things that I'd be interested to note from each of you, and it might go in turn, is what is compelling about the heat pump debate at the moment in your country? Is it being driven really by you all mentioned climate targets, for example? Does that mean that it's certainly front and center of the sort of political dialogue, that it's something, or is it something which industry or investors are looking for in terms of response to climate change? From a buildings point of view, we're always looking at how buildings can be climate proof, and particularly future climate proof, which means that we need to be thinking ahead about how to provide the kind of policy frameworks that give the market that sort of push towards more efficiency. But Rachel, I might start with you. You were a little bit down on the Australian regulatory standards in your presentation, and yet we do have climate targets. So yeah, why heat pumps now? What do you see as being the sort of the impact driver for Australia at the moment?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's two things. So emissions are a big part of it. So Australia, like many countries, has agreed to the Paris Agreement. We're looking for net zero by 2050. Importantly, our delay is in part due to what we called the climate wars, which was a really divisive era of several decades in Australian politics, which really led to us lagging behind the rest of the developed world, because we were like busy arguing about whether or not climate change was a thing, believe it or not. So that changed a couple of years ago with the election of a new government, which is why I think now all of these commitments are being taken more seriously, although again, our states and territories all have various levels of ambition. Some are far more ambitious than even the federal government. So that's one of the biggest reasons. The other one is, like many places, the cost of living. So for us, you know, there's a lot of stress and pressure on people and businesses at the moment. And we're seeing a sharp increase in the cost of gas. And in some states, again, like Victoria, we have a really big reliance on gas. We've got a lot of heavier industry reliant on gas, as well as many, many households. So the cost of that has been quite crippling. To give you an idea, I only have gas, hot water, and that bill per quarter is more than the electricity for my entire home. So you can see why there's now a pretty strong case to be wanting to get people off gas. But that's another discussion, really. So it's cost and it's climate for us.
Yeah, cost and climate. It's that's another point we'll come back to, I think, too. You mentioned cost of living crisis. This is something which is really a global phenomenon right now. Totok, in Indonesia, it's a different sort of economic situation, a different, very diverse country as well. And so do you see cohesion in the policy settings around climate and building regulations? And I'm wondering, there are a number of different initiatives in Indonesia right now on improving building regulations and so on. Is this, I guess, being driven by the concern for climate? Is it to do with also economic pressures as well?
Yes. Yeah, as I mentioned that actually the regulation related with energy conservation is based on government regulation. It's actually launched last year, and right now the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources, they are preparing the derivative regulation for more operational for the, it's actually under ministry regulation, and now there will be like a 7 ministry regulation related with implementation of energy management in building and industries, and then energy conservation service businesses like ESCO. There will be strong regulation because it will be supported by financing, Ministry of Financing, and then the implementation for the government and local government, there will be also specific regulation will be implemented. So energy efficiency must be implemented in all type of building and industries. And then the criteria for successful implementation for energy conservation is one of the ministry regulation. And then disincentive also will be very specific, will be implemented in ministry's regulation. And standardization, also data system, database for energy efficiency also, it's just started. There's actually, if we are talking about building, there will become from Ministry of Public Work, and if we are talking about energy efficiency, it's come from Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources. And then the last is related with guidance and supervision, and how measurement and verification is must be verified correctly with from the government. So I hope that with all the operational regulation, the energy efficiency become quite strong, and hopefully the end of this year the regulation will be released.
Right. That's it's going to raise another question about the enforcement and you know, how we've got the capability administratively as well to ensure that these regulations can really be adopted. It's good to see, though, sort of a regulatory reform process sort of planning ahead like that, and leaving space for us to be able to look at incorporation of technologies in the right building types. Paulette, when you were talking about Chile, there was also that sense of a diversity across the country. And I do want to ask you the question about culture, but I thought just to start with, what is driving interest in this topic in Chile at the moment? Is it indeed climate crisis and targets being the main driver here, or is it to do more, with economic development or social issues?
Well, I believe that the thing that started the ball rolling was the climate, because yes, Chile was, well, it's a signatory of the Paris Agreement. They have been very well aware of the risks of climate, but the main driver here, of course, is the air quality, and not only exterior air quality but indoor air quality as well. So we consider that actually, I mean, as I mentioned before, the firewood heating accounts for over 90% in the southern region of households. You can imagine the level of air quality indoors. And it's not only the firewood for heating, they use it for water heating as well, and cooking. So actually the cost of air pollution indoors and outdoors in Chile in some regions is considerable. Some people, well, there's some studies that actually it's estimated that air pollution costs at least $670 million into the healthcare sector, and it causes a lot of premature deaths as well. So that was, I believe, the main driver here. And as well, the government in the last years, they have really got into the boat of tackling energy poverty. So despite the country being a high income country and not a very wide range of the population lives in poverty, but energy poverty itself, it's considerable. So there are almost 10% of households in rural area don't have constant access to electricity. So the country has been has started to drive a lot of policy into that sense, and that it just started to couple very well into the climate part. And as well, I mean, due to Chile's geographic particularity, it is really, well, it has a lot of changes for climate change. I mean, the whole country is covered with costs, so they are aware that climate change is going to impact heavily into the country, and that it's going to cause more and more needs for heating and cooling as well. So I believe those are the main drivers.
Right. It's interesting. You mentioned equity, but I've also heard people talking about the upfront cost of new technologies like heat pumps. And I wanted to, this is a segue to India, actually, Ethrath, and I wanted to check in. You were talking, you talked a lot about, well, in your analysis, basically, you were talking about industry being the main sort of market area for heat pumps. But I did want to ask, with regards to the drivers for energy efficiency technologies, and I know Klaas was working a lot for many years closely with the Bureau of Energy Efficiency on minimum performance standards. When it comes to technologies like heat pumps, you know, what's the government's driver for looking for regulation in this space? You've sort of presented that sort of market opportunity, that growth opportunity? Is it what's behind the Bureau of Energy Efficiency sort of move on appliance minimum performance requirements and standards?
Okay, so in India, we have one program known as like Perform, Achieve and Trade, PAT, in which all the industries which come under the umbrella of this PAT scheme, they will give every year energy efficiency targets. So all the industries, and this program is almost like 15 to 20, almost 10 to 12 year old. And so all the industries, when they need to reduce their energy consumptions, they get energy audit done, and energy auditors, they generally recommended to replace the boilers or low heat requirement with a heat pump. So that is the one main driver, this PAT scheme. And apart from that, there is one more entity which is known as EESL. So they are doing a pilot study of the heat pump in different locations of the India. So the main factor which influence the heat pumps are cost. So for industries, we heard the heat pump will run for 365 days. There the payback will come within 2 months or 3 months, less than a year. But for residential sector, we heard the heat pump will work only for 1 month. The payback will come in 7-8 years or more than that. So the main factor is cost, and second factor is that PAT scheme is like the main driver to promote heat pump in India.
Right. Yeah, really interesting. Last question for anybody on the panel, really, maybe you can chime in if it resonates here. But we're looking at incorporating your experience, a policy toolkit. And I guess I'm wondering, what do you think is the sort of the right narrative for improving building related policies in your countries that would support, you know, more heat pump technologies, more energy efficient technologies? One thing that occurs to me when I listen to all of your presentations is that we have, and I think it's because of the brief, focused a lot on the technology itself and the benefits of applying it in different settings. But I'm also wondering about what the role of reducing demand might be, whether that be demand for heating or cooling, and so on. And so maybe just a quick tour of the table in regards to building regulations and reducing demand. Do you see that as being something that could support more of a clean energy transition, which would include heat pumps? So, Rachel, what do you think?
Yeah, unsurprisingly, the person from the Energy Efficiency Council is very keen to talk about demand. But yes, I absolutely think that it has a role to play. If you consider that there's a global sort of estimate, right, that energy efficiency and that demand management can deliver sort of a full quarter of the world's emissions reduction to 2050. That's more than what's expected from renewable energy. And the EEC, along with a bank here in Australia, commissioned some research on that and found that indeed energy efficiency and electrification can deliver like 14 and 26% of Australia's emissions reductions respectively, but also they can support us through the transition as we move from fossil fuels onto renewable. Of course, we're going to need to encourage demand during the daytime when those renewables are operating, and we're going to need to discourage demand of an evening. And energy efficiency and technologies like heat pumps have a really big role to play in both reducing the cost of the energy transition and all of the infrastructure that we need to build to transition to renewable, but also in making sure that we don't see instances where we've not got enough energy and we're starting to have blackouts and the like. So big role to be played there, and the size of the prize is large.
Great. I'm with you on that front. I think with regards to building design too, that's something that we should be exploring.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Tok in Indonesia, energy efficiency is starting to be regulated now through the regulation 2121, for example. Is this going to grow? Do you think we can increase the minimum performance requirements for energy efficiency in buildings in Indonesia?
Yes, I think the energy efficiency policy is quite important especially for buildings. My experience is when green building certification is becoming popular in Indonesia. I do more than 100 building already certified for green building. We can reduce the energy efficiency index for normal city like Jakarta. Office is actually like 250 kilowatt hour per square meter per year. And then if the building is certified with the green building, we can reduce up to 150 or 160. So it's quite potential saving for building. Another example, I think that the need is actually for heat pump technology, we have to have a pilot project. For example, I just finished conducting energy audit and for the 27 hospitals owned by Jakarta Province. And then we propose to get to improve the air conditioning system, also implementation for solar panel. And we propose with the public partnership program will be the program is actually under international funding from Germany, and it's quite interesting because, for example, I just calculate replacing split system with the PRF system. We can improve like 30% energy saving, and if we implementing heat pump for hospital, I think it's my prediction, if we can combine between central chiller and with additional heat pump, it can be more than 30% saving potential. But the introduction new technology is not easy in Indonesia. We need the pilot project. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. now we can we can explore some of these issues too. There's quite a lot of questions that have come through on the Q&A channel. So one of the questions which has come up actually is probably more of a comment, but it might be a question that can be answered to begin with by Athrat, because it deals, and perhaps talk a little bit to you too. So the comment is that market development for industrial heat pumps is still in a growth phase, which affects availability and competitiveness. So you both talked about the opportunities for industrial heat pumps. And so maybe Athrat, from your perspective in India, you even showed a demonstration project, which is something that Tok was calling for. Do you think that there's a problem with sort of the maturity of the market, or are there any policy measures that can be deployed to sort of increase the availability or performance of the heat pump technologies available in the market?
Yes, I absolutely agree. There are like two factors are there. First is local manufacturing is very, very less. And all the low-cost heat pump, inefficient heat pumps are coming from other countries. And second one is, at present, we don't have any test standards to measure the efficiency of the heat pumps. So because of like these two factors, it might affect the availability of the heat pumps in the market.
Right. So the question obviously is, in the climate crisis, what are the things we can do to accelerate the market development of these technologies? Let's hold that one. You don't have to answer that straight away. That's a hard question. So another question which relates to this, well, we've got you on the floor from CLASP, is question is, are any traditional boiler or gas companies moving to manufacturing heat pumps, or are they resistant to heat pumps because it's going to hurt their business?
No, they are like companies are like, they are like Thermax. They are like manufacturing boilers from long time, and now they are manufacturing heat pumps also. And apart from that, even like water heater manufacturers, like in India, we have Racold, one manufacturer is there. They are also making heat pumps. So all the boiler companies, traditional boiler companies, or I can say big boiler companies, they are shifting towards heat pump, or they are integrating heat pumps with their existing boilers.
Right. And I just wonder if anybody else has got a view on that. I mean, it's an issue of, I was thinking when you put that, when you're talking about Chile, and I was thinking about the Australian situation where we don't have performance standards for heat pumps, and I guess it's whatever technology is available is in the market at the moment. I mean, does that mean that we need some kind of concerted effort to get the market going?
Well, they're starting to, well, they will start to work on it, and it's hopefully starting this year, the performing standards and certifications and all. But also the government is starting to push the use of heat pumps within the industrial sector. So one of the programs that they launched a financial program, for example, last year, which is called Put Energy to Your Company, where they actually provide a grant to implement heat pumps and stuff. Heat pumps and hybrid systems. So last year they actually awarded 2 of them. So we can see that it's just in very incipient stages. They are starting to get into it. But as well, that the use of firewood is not only in the household sector. Actually, the use of firewood is, from the industrial sector is the 50%, and the other 49% is household. So we can see that firewood is really king everywhere. So the shift is not going to be as easy as well. But they are starting to consider it. They are starting to move into pushing the shift, into heat pumps, but not only heat pumps by itself, but more traditional, more efficient technologies. They have done some pilot projects in governmental and buildings, in a school, in a hospital as well, but they are just a handful. So they have started in the last years, and they are just starting to see the implementation. And I believe that what they are most, and the other thing as well is that actually most of the buildings were built in the last, let's say, 20 years as well. So there's not a lot of room either in the building sector to implement at this point heat pumps, but more on the new or forthcoming buildings as well. But yeah, they are pushing the industrial sector, and there's a big problem as well with not a lot of people on board. For example, the government has provided a list of let's say certificated or what certificate installers and manufacturers, but it's very hard to find. So at the beginning where I was doing my research, I found the document, and then when I was trying to look it again, it was really hard to find. So that the problem of information dissemination, it's still hard in Chile at this point, but they are starting into that path.
I would say Australia's in a similar boat. So we do have minimum energy performance standards for reverse cycle heat pumps and labelling requirements as well that address climate zones, because we do have 8 climate zones in Australia. So again, a bit similar to Chile in that regard too. A lot of different climates to deal with, but we don't have them for heat pump hot water systems, and we don't have them for like commercial systems either, including those we might use in industrial systems. And this is of course a problem. It's a problem like other countries we've heard about today that we're working on, but we are working on it at a glacial pace, which is a bit frustrating, but we're trying and we'll get there. And then on the other hand, for the industrial stuff, very much the same. It's in the early stages, the growth phase. So although we don't have a huge manufacturing sector, we do actually have a lot of food manufacturing in Australia. It's an area of advantage for us. And that's actually a great area to use industrial heat pumps in because of the types of temperatures that they like to use in those areas. So it would be great to see more of that happening. But there's not a lot of policy drivers and not a lot of knowledge. We have had some great pilots. There are examples of facilities saving, $1 million plus over years in energy bills by using heat pumps. So we do have great examples to point to, but again, handful type of thing. And we do have one policy driver for this, noting that Australia does not have a carbon tax. That was all part of the climate wars that I mentioned. But we do have something called the safeguard mechanism, which applies to particularly large facilities and is a driver whereby they are obligated legally to push their emissions down. So in those facilities, they're always looking for opportunities. And I think inevitably heat pumps will be deployed there.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. And there's many questions coming through around at the pace of change now. So let me see if I can capture a couple of these in one. So I guess the spirit of some of the questions that are coming through is where we don't have a lot of time to address these issues. So, I'll add this context to the question. Of course, we're looking at halving building sector emissions by 2030 and being zero emissions by 2050 if we're going to meet the 1.5 target, or the building sector is going to contribute to the 1.5 target, which means that we've got to try and work out ways of making step changes more quickly. And I guess the questions revolve around what is the likely trigger for a step change in your markets. Is it, for example, starting with where the biggest potential lies? So is it, an industry or manufacturing driving, sort of incorporating, using that to build capacity, trade capacity and skills, as well as manufacturing of components and other things that go with, and sort of focusing on that? Is it another question sort of come up, is it about banning things? So gas bans, for example, firewood bans, I'm sure there'd be a backlash. It sounds like there'd be a backlash in Chile around that. We've talked about, in India banning inefficient technologies as well. So is there anything that you can see that might lead to that sort of radical shift? Is it something where we go all in on a particular industry to get the equipment and the capability in the market so that we can move into buildings? Is there a strategy like that? I guess a lot of people are kind of asking that question of how to get to scale. So I don't know who'd like to jump in and handle that question. If anyone wants to, you can pop up your hands. If not, I'll just pick on somebody.
we'll just solve the world's problems.
Yes, yes.
It's probably going to be a mix of all of those things, because obviously what's going to work in our industrial sector is going to be very different than homes. I mean, we don't have the wood fire issue, although admittedly I did grow up in a town that did have a wood fire issue, and it's a hard one to deal with, and they're still arguing about it now, which is a shout out to Launceston, Tasmania. But at any rate, Australians are putting up a bit of a fight about getting rid of their gas cooktops. There's an emotional connection to that type of cooking. So, you know, there's sort of an emotional attachment to these appliances in homes that are not going to be present, hopefully, in industrial facilities. Or one might think it odd if someone was particularly attached to a gas boiler in an industrial facility. But I think in Australia, because we do have such a lax standards and regulatory environment, that should be the place that we're looking at first in buildings, because there are big opportunities there, because we haven't been doing so well. We have done well in our commercial buildings, and that's because we actually have a good disclosure program in those buildings and a driver and a policy driver, and the results have been phenomenal. You know, minimum rental standards get results. Appliances are changed over. It's a no-brainer, really, in that regard. You know, it's a stick or a carrot. A stick does work a little bit better in terms of forcing action and noting, you know, our need to get to net zero and how slow this is going. Forcing action does seem appropriate. But then again, there is a place for grants and incentives and all of these other things to support people to achieve the same end as well. But it's going to be a mix of all of those things, and it's going to look a bit different based on the sector or the type of building.
Great.
If I may chime in there, I believe, I mean, at least in Chile, for example, we could start by the very low hanging fruits. I mean, Chile is one of the king countries in public-private partnerships in general, especially in the region. So we could start by really forcing all the public infrastructure projects and buildings and stuff that are being done, by forcing them into implementing some sort of either heat pump or energy efficiency sort of mechanism. And that would actually get the private sector and the builders into the boat of realizing that overall costs are actually better into that. And then, I mean, I believe that the hardest sector to convince is going to be the household sector, because of this very strong cultural part. But if we start in the chunk with either the public, with big infrastructure projects or buildings and public buildings and stuff, then the private sector will start getting in, and then maybe get another sort of program into the industrial sector, which is strong in Chile as well. But that would imply another sort of lobbying as well, because even, I mean, as I mentioned before, the non-regulated firewood market is worth $800 million annually. So lobbying is going to be requested. There's going to be a lot of checks and balances, not trying to get into that. So we need to get the industrial sector with other sort of incentives to jump into this boat, I believe.
Right. Thank you for that. It's a tough one, and it definitely depends on the economic frameworks in the countries that they're working in as well. Where the carrots, the sticks, and we like to talk about tambourines as well. Awareness raising, education, and so on, where what the right balance is. And I think that's where the toolkit project is coming in, is trying to look at what kind of policy measures as typologies can be useful to address the priorities in a particular economic situation. This is a question without notice to Magure, actually. I think there was a question about how this might apply implementing such approaches in Nigeria and potentially on the African continent. Magure, I don't know whether you wanted to provide some insight on the way you see it there.
Thanks, Peter. So I can maybe just give a brief answer. I think one of the challenges in terms of use of heat pumps on the African continent, obviously, is because we're a very hot continent. So typically the use of heat pumps is used in water heating. And I think the same applies in the Nigerian context. But some of the major issues that have been highlighted by some of the case studies presented here do apply, including sort of no structured policy and really not mainstreaming of their use. So maybe I'd leave it at that. With the Nigeria context, primarily the use is in water heating and really around the challenges, or rather the opportunity to structure policy to support the use of heat pumps on the African continent does exist.
Great, thank you for that. I'm just checking in on the time. So I think we're at the point where we need to close the session, aren't we, Magure? I think we could settle in with the discussion on how to change the world this way and continue, but we are running up to the clock. So and I'm just checking if there were any other questions we've missed. Not really. Okay, well, look, I just want to make a few closing reflections. I guess what we've seen is that there is it's been very interesting to hear from warm climates as well as varied climates in this discussion about, you know, the role of heat pump technologies. What I'm taking away from this, apart from some of the points that have been made by the panelists for their own specific locations, are that if we are to address these sorts of the climate crisis and decarbonisation quickly, we kind of need to act on. Is it the low-hanging fruit? It's the I guess all the countries here have got building regulations and other standards which are in various states of ambition and various states of implementation, and that as those frameworks exist, we should be trying to make the most out of those. And so there's an area that we can look at around just trying to achieve the mitigation potential of the regulations and standards that we have. That's no mean feat, because as we've heard today, in order to do that, we actually have to I think, have a linked up strategy around how building energy efficiency regulations and technologies are working towards the net zero targets and Paris commitments that we've got. And it seems like we're at this phase where there's a lot of activity going on, but it's not necessarily coordinated. And so that's an opportunity for us all as well. And I think, you know, those of us working in and with NGOs have a role to play in that, of being able to look at the various aspects of policy and try and help line up strategies which are going to lead to great impact. Seems to be a great opportunity around new building, I think, especially in India and in Indonesia, but of course we've got new construction booming in many parts of the world, Australia, in the growing cities. And I was fascinated to see that question around health is a driver in Chile. I think, again, for various different we've actually seen this in our work in India, where thermal comfort has been a driver for policy reform for building regulation or informing building regulatory reviews. And it seems that if we can look at what are the non-climate drivers and what are the non-climate benefits of better buildings, better technologies, and cleaner technologies like heat pumps, that might also help accelerate change somewhat, notwithstanding the cultural attachment to existing technologies that we have. We just may have to make some tough decisions at a certain point around what is actually appropriate for facing up to the climate challenges that we have, and also the cost of living challenges and access to clean energy and sustainable housing. The next steps with this work, the information that's been very generously provided here by the panelists, our team led by Magure will start to work with you all to develop up some short case studies, which will then be incorporated eventually into the upgrading of the policy toolkit. And if anybody who's been attending the webinar today would like to get involved or may want to follow the project, Magure has provided some links in the chat that you can follow to find out more, and also just to get in touch and stay close to this project as well. I'm sure we haven't covered all of the issues, and I'm sure there's a lot more that we could dig into, but it's great to see the level of interest in this. And just to the panelists, I want to say thank you very much. I know RAP, GBPN and CLASP, we've got a strong connection through the Crux Alliance, but I think also EEC and of course GBPN and MASCAE and GBC Indonesia. Let's all stay in touch and work on these issues together. I think I will say that we have collectively made some progress, and that's great. Now we need to take it up a notch, I think, to address the issues that we face now. So with that, I'd like to thank you all. I'd like to thank Magure and Rehema from GBPN in Africa, in Nairobi, Kenya, for arranging this and for all of the back-end work that's been done to support the speakers on the panel and also the smooth running of the webinar today. This has been recorded, so I assume there'll be a record of this available to people who've registered for the webinar. And Magure, I think there was a question about whether the slides would be shared, and I think if with the permission of the panelists, we would do that. So that brings us to the end. I'll pass back to you, Magure, if there's anything else that we've missed, but just on behalf of the GBPN and RAP, I guess, to everybody, all the partners in the Heat Pump Toolkit project, thank you very much for attending today, and thank you to the panelists again. Magure?
Thank you so much, Peter, and thank you so much to the panelists. We really appreciate you taking your time and your energy to share your expertise. And I'm sure everyone in attendance can appreciate how much you have educated us. Peter, thank you for moderating the session. And I know Richard has left us, but we're very grateful for taking us through that session as well. To everybody who's attended, I've shared some information in the chat in case you'd like to follow up with some information, our email addresses and some links. Please feel free to contact us, and have a wonderful, wonderful day. Thank you, or evening from wherever you are across the world.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.